Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Onofrio, and today I'm here to talk to you about my action research project, Number Talks, and their effects on high school students' participation and confidence in math class. For my introduction, I wanted to tell you a little bit about two of my students. Both of my students had good grades and good attendance and great participation. However, 7 weeks into the quarter, they learned each other's names for the first time, despite having been in class with each other the whole time. This made me wonder, what does this say about the learning process in my room, its teacher-centricness, and the way students are engaging with the math? A little bit more about me. I teach as a math educator in an urban alternative high school. Many of my students have a great deal of existing math trauma and learning gaps from previous years. And I believe that math involves not only knowing facts, but being able to think critically and communicate your thoughts. As a result, I wanted to focus my project on this communication. So I decided to start my research review by looking at math anxiety. Math anxiety is defined as a negative emotional response, such as fear and tension when facing math. It is often accompanied or developed because of parent math anxiety and because of negative gender stereotypes, although there are research that suggests it can have biological development factors as well. Math anxiety can have a very detrimental effect on students' academic and social emotional performance. Foley in 2017 found that math anxiety and performance goes both ways, meaning they affect each other in a cycle. In other studies, Casad et al. Found that math anxiety results in higher avoidance and negative attitudes towards math situations. I chose number talks as a way to try and combat my students' math anxiety. Peterman and Ewing proposed 5 different strands of math learning portrayed on the slide. And Sun et al. Describe a number talk as a way to combine 3 of these different strands in a way that traditional instruction does not. Number talks have been shown to be effective with grade school students, such as in 6th grade, where they improved number sense and equivalent expressions, and in 1st grade, where students were able to better make sense of how their own ideas related to high-level strategies. There are also researched social emotional benefits to number talks. Hufford-Ackles found that frequent number talks helped lower achieving students become more comfortable in the classroom, and that students who participated in number talks had higher math self-concepts and were more willing to participate with growth mindset strategies. However, all of this research was focused on elementary school students. I wanted to broaden this research and see what happened with high schoolers, seeing what would happen if number talks would increase the quantity and quality of classroom participation while also reducing math anxiety. This helps align with my goal of making students critical thinkers who can communicate mathematically. I chose to focus on 2 research questions. First, how and to what extent do number talks influence the willingness to participate in math classes? And second, how and to what extent do number talks impact classroom community, math anxiety, and growth mindset for high schoolers? I collected data from 3 sources. First, I used a 10-question survey that my students took twice to figure out what happened with growth mindsets and classroom community. Second, I used a response tally where I divided the number of responses by the length of instructional time to create a response per minute. Finally, I used a reflective journal to provide additional context about the lessons and observational data that I could color my findings with. I analyzed the data in 2 primary ways. Survey data was grouped into pre and post responses, and then I grouped the questions further into groups of 5. Class averages were then computed and used to compare different sections. My response tallies were graphed on a line graph with, again, same sections, and I used my reflective journal to provide additional context. I chose to analyze my work through the theoretical framework of socio-mathematical norms proposed by Yackel and Cobb. These are very similar to social norms, but they include important math qualifiers. It let me incorporate both academic and SEL analysis while also considering what was present in my classroom. So, into my findings. In my geometry classes, number talks were more successful in increasing growth mindsets for my block 2 than block 4, but both classes still had a larger effect than for algebra 2. This partially answers my research question, saying that number talks are important, can develop a math anxiety, can help a growth mindset, but more so for younger students. The second part of my survey provided info about classroom community. Again, geometry had more of a benefit than algebra 2, but this time the benefit was more universal, suggesting that for my students, number talks were an effective way of raising classroom community. When looking at the ratings per minute results for my geometry, even though my block 2 geometry started with less responses, they ended with higher, showing that they likely had larger benefits on classroom participation from number talks. This also suggests, I also found that they were providing more explanation in a deeper level when they were answering as opposed to my block 4. When looking at my Algebra 2 students, their responses were a little bit more consistent and they leveled off towards the end of the study, suggesting that the number talks had less effect. This answers my other research question, saying that my number talks were more effective at raising classroom participation for my younger students than for my older students. So there were kind of three major implications I had here. One of my first findings was that number talks can be an effective way to develop classroom community and growth mindsets. They also introduce low-level discourse for my students. However, I need to do further research to find ideas for my older Algebra 2 students as the geometry students benefited more. For my second implication, I found that number talks can have a marked response effect on student response quality and quantity. However, this response was better accompanied by a growth mindset seen in the data from my geometry classes. As a result, I plan on implementing more growth mindset activities throughout the school year next year and devoting more time at the beginning to develop this mindset. Finally, number talks helped my students engage with discourse in the classroom and showed that they could rise to the occasion when presented with these problems. They were more willing to engage with the number talks than with any other section of the lesson. So, my future steps, I plan on shifting my whole class further towards an inquiry-based framework and moving discourse on content level to a daily activity as opposed to a weekly activity. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed my presentation and have a wonderful rest of your semester.